Welcome to a Musical Talk mini episode. And in this you'll be able to hear me, Thos Ribbits, in conversation with the wonderful Sue Casson about her 5-star show Dreams of Peace and Freedom, and hear why this show is more relevant than ever, and how you can see it, hear it, and perhaps even sing it. Sue, you don't know what a pleasure it is to see you again. Thank you so much. Now, you have been responsible for some of the most wonderful moments I've had in the theatre this year. And I'm delighted. Well, I'm delighted to say as well that these are moments which others can now share. So we're here today, really, aren't we, to talk about your fantastic 5-star show from Edinburgh, Dreams of Peace and Freedom.
It's true.
We've talked about it a bit on Musical Talk already, but tell us, where did the title come from? And tell us a bit about the piece, just to remind people and re-whet their appetites.
Well, funnily enough, this time last year, on this exact day, we did the first version of Dreams of Peace and Freedom, which was really a song cycle put together from music that I'd written as a background or as an underscore to a film that was being made by Tom Blackmore, my partner in English Cabaret, about human rights, the development of human rights, how the convention came about, and in particular through the eyes of his grandfather, David Maxwell Fyfe. And we were doing a pulling together of that at St Matthew's Church in Westminster to launch the website Kill Me Your Papers. And that was happening all through the afternoon because Tom was going through what was on the website. And in the evening we thought, well, wouldn't it be lovely to do a performance of the music that we'd used in the film? Because we're not going to play the film on the afternoon, it was purely to explain what the website was about and how it worked. And so we decided to do that, and my daughter Lily got together some friends from Southwark Cathedral Choir, and we had a little choir of 6 to sing 3 parts, which is what Dreams of Peace and Freedom is, and quite a large part of what the score of Dreams of Peace is now, but with a fewer numbers, if you like. And so that was the start of Dreams of Peace and Freedom. When we came to revisit it after the success of that event in the summer, and we thought, well, actually, that song cycle had a bit of legs. We had such a really good response to it when we did it in Westminster. It would be worth doing at Edinburgh this year. We thought, well, we don't want it to be called Under an English Heaven anymore, because in fact that was the film that we did, and it's distinct from the film, and in order to tell the story in a theatrical way and make the move into a different kind of media, it needed to have a different name, it needed to have a different persona, and so
it's a different entity, isn't it?
Different entity.
So it ought, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and there was a song that we had come across when we had been up in the Highlands exploring David Maxwell Fyfe's roots, because that was where he came from, Dornoch. And at the jail in Dornoch, which, like all jails now, has turned into a chintzy little coffee shop with a number of, lovely shops.
So iron bars do not a prison make, but a coffee bar does.
They had there some Scottish music, and we thought, wouldn't it be lovely to have some Scottish music to listen to in the car as we drive around all this beautiful Highland scenery. And we came across a piece that was, I think it may have been called Celtic Women or something. It was on a Celtic label, and it was a variety of different people singing, and a lot of very traditional stuff. Some of it, so, what would you say, not just acoustic, but original kind of Scottish, that it had no background. It was actually, a cappella and, raw sound. And one of these songs was a really lovely lullaby about the Highland clearances.
Oh, right, yes.
And the tune was very traditional. It was a tune that we used, that was used in Local Hero, in fact, and one that we recognised. But the words had been written by a poet a few years ago about the Highland clearances, and it talked about Dreams of Peace in the title of the song. And because this led us to the discovery that Maxwell Fyfe family had been involved in the clearances and how important that was to his quest for human rights in later life, we returned to that when we came to look for a title to the show in Edinburgh. And we thought, well, Dreams of Peace and Freedom, because it is about freedom and about rights and freedom, that's what we'll go for.
I didn't know any of that. That's very interesting. I'm delighted by this connection. I love the fact it all connects anyway, but I'm very interested in this idea that human rights has the connection between human rights and freedom, and that's all kinds of freedom, liberty, freedom, and all the things that we have traditionally held as virtuous and positive. Unfortunately, it's getting a bad press at the moment. We don't want to get too big-P political, but for some reason or other there seems to be a move against what the press are portraying human rights as being, which seems to be about court judgments and some kind of anti-European feeling, when in fact the whole thing was forged in the crucible of the Second World War, and one of its great optimistic flowerings, it seems to me, that one of the great benefits of the Second World War, if you can put it that way, one of the incidental benefits, no one would have wanted the war, but we had it, and the thing that came out of it that was so good was this recognition that there are fundamental human rights not to be tortured, unfortunately also evocative and current at the moment, given the recent report on the CIA that's been published in the American Senate just recently. So we're talking, when we talk about human rights here, the birth of human rights at Nuremberg after the Second World War, the beginning of an idealistic new world. That's fair, isn't it?
I think it is. It's certainly fair in terms of the inspiration that David Maxwell Fyfe drew from it, because...
And he is one of the main architects.
Well, yes. I mean, he went on to chair the committee that was developing the European Convention after Nuremberg, and had been one of Britain's chief prosecutors during the trials. So he followed that journey through, and the evidence that came to light during the trials were part of the reason that he was moved to feel the importance of securing a convention that made those freedoms set in stone.
Absolutely. It's a reaction to abhorrent human actions against individual humans.
Absolutely.
Human rights, one might say.
Yeah.
But, and this is the question I got for you, because the piece itself, as you know, I gave it 5 stars. I thought of it as it felt like I was watching a secular hymn, or a series of secular hymns, if you like. And there was a rare sense of sublimity, as I think I said at the time. That happens to me very rarely. I'm not by trade an emotional kind. I'm very rarely transported. But when I saw the show being performed live in a church, as it happened, I was genuinely carried, I was genuinely transcended. There's something interesting about the grit in the oyster, which is the reading of the Kilmuir papers, if you like.
The letters
home,
yes.
With the songs from, or I should say poems, from the First World War, which have been set so very beautifully by you and performed by you and your colleagues. You've got this, if you like, there's I say grit in the oyster, which creates the pearl, but it is that odd symbiosis of these two elements from 2 different wars and 2 different approaches. And the question I've got for you is, if we look at the human rights creation, the convention that comes out of Nuremberg, as an optimistic thing, and I think we have to see it in that way. Certainly,
yes.
That is the way it's portrayed and was intended and aspired to be, against the poetry of the First World War, which historically leaves us with a very different emotional feeling when looked at in its own context, which is it's sad, it's a lament. We use it to be symbolic of the waste and loss and sadness of the First World War, the tragedy of the First World War. So, to me, I have an intellectual problem, which is that you have the optimism of the end of the Second World War and the lamentation and the tragedy writ large through the setting of the poetry of the First World War. Now, somebody might say emotionally that's a very difficult bridge to reach. How were you able to create the link between the sadness and the positivity, the first and the second, the fighting, the people yet to fight and the people who have fought, which comes across so strongly in the piece and creates something beyond anything it feels like it ought to have any right to be?
I'm glad you said that, because I think one of the difficulties with setting something like Rupert Brooke that everybody is people know well, certainly a certain generation of people know well, and are very fond of. I mean, people quote The Soldier. The worry was, when you start to set it, is it going to be something that is almost too sacred to set? And I think that what has happened...
Or has an iconic place which all feels almost difficult to move from.
Exactly. But I think what has happened, almost inadvertently really, is that because it was those words which inspired Maxwell Fyfe, which is why we chose them to set. So we kind of had our it wasn't a sort of, well, shall we set this, shall we set that? It was, well, we will set this because this is what he quoted at Nuremberg. In doing that, we've taken fragments from the sonnets. I mean, the Soldier was the only one that I set entire, and I took bits and gave them, I overlaid them, if you like, with different connotations. Because I think that when we were trying to talk about Auschwitz and his emotions on seeing the Auschwitz liberation films, these hearts were woven of human joys and cares, seemed such an appropriate thing to say.
Fit, isn't it?
It's
Oddly.
absolutely perfect fit, and yet Rupert Brooke had no thought of Auschwitz or of... He was thinking of the people who were dying in the trenches, and I think that another reason why it's not completely a poor match is because Rupert Brooke actually died in 1915. His centenary is next year as well. And therefore he hadn't seen the worst excesses of the Armageddon of the war. He was still...
In the early stages.
Yes, he was still there when people had a kind of feeling that it was going to make it all right, that it was going to be a cleansing process, that this was a short war, that they were going to go through, they were going to make everything better, justice was going to be brought back to the earth, and...
Almost biblical, isn't it? You said Armageddon, and that's very much what you're describing.
So
there,
he
course,
died at a point where he wasn't really aware of the waste in the way that Wilfred Owen, who died so much later on, and Sassoon, and lived through all of that. So there is a hope in the words that he was writing, and it was that hope and that cleansing that Maxwell Fyfe was looking to at the end of Nuremberg. You know, he was looking for that feeling that everything would be made better by having had that terrible moment where everybody had been killed, but the wrong had somehow been wiped out, and justice would reign. And that was what he was aspiring to.
They do, somewhat flippantly, but it's not completely wrongly, suggest that the Second World War is merely the First World War finished. You know, it just had a gap of 20 years in the middle, they say.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's quite a commonly held view, actually.
As always, I'm fascinated by what you say, Sue, because, you know, you add layer and I, you know, they always say, for example, that collage is a 20th century art form. And in a way, you've almost done that with this. There's the collage of the written words from Maxwell Fyfe, the written words of Rupert Brooke, your music overlaid, the live performance of it. You know, as you say, context and recontext plus new layers helps bring a new meaning as well as retain the old.
Hopefully more resonances. That's what we're looking for.
Yes, it's a 3D soundscape, if you like.
Ideally, that would be wonderful.
One more question, if I may, then, on the piece musically, and this is just a wonder question. So there's no right or wrong answer on this. Rupert Brooke is, of course, as you say, iconographic in British culture and in the culture quite often of the Allies, at least from the First World War. But there was also, although I know very little about it, but I wondered if you were to use poetry from one of the other powers. There must have been trench poetry. Well, it was. There was trench poetry from the Germans and the Austrians and the people involved there. I wondered, not whether it would be in English, but if you had translations of those that were powerful and effective translations and set those, whether the piece would have the same resonance. I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, obviously Brooke brings something to the table which an unknown, I use speech marks there, German poet would not for a British audience. But I wonder if it was possible to create the same kind of emotional ambience using different parts of the patchwork of the first, or indeed a different architect of the Human Rights Convention, who may, of course, Maxwell Fyfe has a beautiful way of words, so of course you wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, but do you see what I'm sort of saying? Is the conception of taking the optimism of the new world of human rights and the sadness of the poetry and the tragedy written therein, or displayed therein, could that be created using different creative starting points? I clumsily asked that question, but you get the point.
I think it's an interesting idea. But the important thing about the way that this has turned out is a happy accident, really, of the ingredients. And had Maxwell Fyfe not been so inspired by Rupert Brooke, I don't know that is where we would have gone to set.
There was a personal connection between the one and the other.
When we started by thinking, well, that's a bit of a weird one, though I take your point about, the continual war between 1 and 2. I think if I'd been starting on an odyssey to find music and songs to write, I may not have started with the First World War. It's a funny... it happened like that because of Maxwell Fyfe. He was the centre, and therefore it all comes back to him. It's a kaleidoscope centred on Maxwell Fyfe, and that's the reason why we set that other sort of rogue Scottish poet, James Logie Robinson, which turned out to be a sort of theme for his Scottishness as well, because he was a dialect poet. But he had actually written towards the end of the Nuremberg trials, he'd written back to his wife about this particular poem that summed up, how they were all feeling out there. And it was all about green shoots and how things aren't always raining and things do get better. And very soon afterwards, he was already talking about, we forget too easily. We've got a sundial mentality and we only remember the good things. And the fact that we don't want to think about people doing horrible things to people in Auschwitz means that we kind of brush it under the carpet because, it's mankind cannot bear the reality.
And which is why somehow, once again taking us back to the press and the British media, that somehow human rights have become, in the popular culture, divorced from the idea of this must never happen again, the Second World War.
Yes. Yeah, because I worry about that.
So do I.
Because I worry that, these things never happen because everybody sets out to be evil. I think they set out because they become a byproduct of desperation, and you find yourself in a corner fighting for something and keeping your end up, and before you know it, keeping your end up means battering down somebody else's end.
Yes.
And that is the worry, which is why we've been launching today the Big Year for Freedom, because in fact next year, 2015, is the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, which was the first...
I was there,
Good God.
It explains so much, though, doesn't it?
Which was the first attempt to actually put rights into words, make a piece of legislation to contain the kingly powers. And although people were very dismissive of it in following years, it set out a marker for rights.
It's totemic as well.
It's totemic. Yeah. And so the fact that happened 800 years ago in 2015 and the European Convention happened 65 years ago in 2015.
And of course, as you say, it's also the anniversary, or the 100th anniversary of the death of Rupert Brooke.
Absolutely.
So there are so many things about 2015 which
make
resonant.
It a big year for freedom.
So how are you... And bearing in mind the show we've just been talking about, I suspect there must be a connection. Forgive me, this show is a perfect fit for all the anniversaries of 2015, and there are chances to see it, are there not?
We're certainly hoping so, because what we've done today is
And today's Human Rights Day.
Today is Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day. Today we've gone live with our English Cabaret website, and on there you can hear the whole of Dreams of Peace and Freedom.
And it is well worth listening to, everybody, please.
You can also buy it now as well for £10 as a download. But the other thing that we've done, which is, I think, very important, is that until the end of January, we're offering the score, piano and 3 voices, as a download to encourage choirs countrywide to sing it, because that would be the greatest thing, to get it popping up in different places. We're going to pop up ourselves. We've decided we're going to pop up in the places that were important to Maxwell Fyfe. So we're popping up in Dornoch, which is where his mother came from, and we're popping up in Liverpool, where he began his political career, because he was the MP there for many years, but also where he learnt to become a barrister, and and then we're going to do it in Oxford, which was his university. We want to do it in Nuremberg.
Fantastic.
And in Strasbourg, obviously. We've already done it in London and Edinburgh, but I dare say we could be tempted to do that there again, or encourage other choirs to do it there on our behalf next time. So that's the plan for the Big Year of Freedom.
So this is an open invitation in many ways.
Absolutely.
This is a show that you can hear to see if you like it, and if you do, you can get the music, you can get the score.
Yep.
You can perform it.
Yep.
There are resonances. You're going to perform it, or at least connect with it in various places. So this is the smorgasbord of opportunities. I, who have no musical talent at all, will only be able to see it again. Whereas people who can sing, or as part of choirs, and there are hundreds of those across the country, thousands probably, have a real opportunity to connect and
sing.
Absolutely. And we mustn't forget that, the 100th anniversary of the First World War continues apace. It wasn't just 2014.
It's not over yet. No.
It's right up until 2018.
Yeah.
This sounds marvellous. Where was that website again, Sue?
It's www.englishcabaret.co.uk.
So people must go along to the website and really get a taste for it and see what options there might be for them. But as you say, you can just hear the music by going to the pages on the website in their own right. They are there in background, aren't they?
They're absolutely there, and you can read the script as well as you go along.
And you very kindly said that we can finish today with one of the great songs from Dreams of Peace and Freedom.
Absolutely.
Which one?
The song that we've been using on the website is one called Safety, which is something that I think we should be thinking about during the big year of freedom. And
it's one of the things we cherish the most and take for granted the most in the West, certainly.
Exactly, and we don't want to brush that aside unknowingly, which is a very real fear at the moment.
There are some concerns, aren't there, that people might walk, I think we were saying before we recorded, sleepwalk into losing something very precious, but that no one realised was precious until it's gone.
Yeah. And there's a sort of little unresolved chord in it that I think symbolises that feeling that we should hold on.
Sue, as always, it's not only a great pleasure talking to you, I have to say it's an inspiration and an education. So thank you very much for talking to me.
Oh, thank you.
So here is one of the songs from your marvellous Dreams of Peace and Freedom.
Most people approach the subject of war crimes trials fundamentally either as a cynic or an idealist. This is, I think, because in essence the case for or against trying war criminals depends on that controversial subject which has become succinctly known as human rights. Your cynic says, human rights, there are none. Your idealist, however, takes the view that there are certain rights and freedoms not created by lawyers, but to which mankind as such are heir, and which cannot be alienated. The idea of fundamental human rights is one in which I firmly believe.
We have found safety with all things undying, the winds and morning, tears of men and mirth, the deep night, birds singing and clouds flying, and sleep and freedom and the autumnal earth. We have found safety. We have found safety. That's not for time's throwing. That's not for time's throwing. We have found safety. There's security. Who is as safe as we?
If our unfortunate generation has proved one thing, it has demonstrated that the barbarian is not behind us, but always underneath us, ready to rise up.
Deep night, morning, sleep and freedom. Deep night, wonder, birds singing and praising and mirth. We have found safety and freedom in the autumn. We have found safety, that's not and freedom. We have found safety and still and freedom. We have found safety and freedom in the autumn. Deep night, morning, sleep and freedom. We have found safety with all things undying, the winds and morning, tears of men and mirth, the deep night, birds singing and clouds flying, and
This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2014, except for the song where the copyright remains with Sue Casson.